feel free to either put that in the chat and we'll relay it, or there's a little raise hand button that you can do that too. So we have people in the virtual space will pay attention. So, okay, go ahead, Martha.
Let me fix this.
Oh, you're being recorded.
All right. So, as Anna said, I'm Martha Minchak. I was an assistant area wildlife manager with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources for about 38 years and just retired in July. And as my fly fishing buddies have said, it's not really retiring, it's refiring, re-inspiring, rewiring. So that's totally what I'm doing. I just stepped away from the agency. I still plan to continue all the work that I've been doing around the estuary and lots of other fun things that I like to do, wildlife surveys and things like that. So I'm sure I'll run into you all a lot in the future. But for now, I just stepped away from the agency. I don't have to represent the agency anymore, but I can still serve on all the teams and committees and whatnot, working in the river as I used to. And on my own time schedule. So really looking forward to it. Best of all worlds. So I came to the St. Louis River Estuary and Duluth in the fall of 2000. And so I've been here that time. Before that, I worked all over Minnesota, starting out in southwestern Minnesota for about 5 years, working in northwestern Minnesota for about 15 years, and at 3 different stations with the Minnesota DNR. So Thief Lake, Thief River Falls, and Carlstead up in the northwest. And in the southwest, I worked out of New Ulm, Medelia on some research projects. And my first and best job with the DNR was a colonial nesting waterbird inventory. Just me and a little runabout canoe and a 3-horse motor going to all of the colonial nesting waterbirds. So heron rookeries and grebe colonies and tern colonies. I grew up in Rhode Island on the Green Point estuary. So I have a love for estuaries, always have. It's kind of in my blood, salt water in my veins. And so I have a real love for estuaries. So this is a very good fit of all the places that I've lived and worked in Minnesota. So when I came here, I got instantly involved in all things estuary. And that's mostly because of my former supervisor, Rich Staffen, that many of you might know. But mostly my job involved working with all wildlife species in southeastern St. Louis County. And the estuary and all the work that I've done here, which is my love and my passion, was a very small part of my job assignment. And so most of my work was working on various wildlife projects. So forest management projects, lots of forest coordination, working with foresters and other wildlife professionals, setting up timber sales and other forest projects. And so managing for things like moose, grouse, deer, sharp-tailed grouse, woodcock, doing habitat projects. And so about 50% of my time was spent on forest coordination. So working with foresters on timber sales and timber harvest, making sure that there was a place for wildlife and that they retained large trees and a diversity of species and like cover types and also structure for all the wildlife species that live in the forest. And then also working on things like, this is brushland shearing. So clearing brush with, there's a mower back in there that you can barely see, but a small mower that would cut brush and mow it in strips for woodcock, woodcock chicks and an adult woodcock in the middle there. And then also for other things, using brushland habitat, sandhill cranes, all the other non-game species that use brushlands. So that was a huge part of my job. Also prescribed burning was a big part of my job, mostly in the spring, but sometimes in fall. And that was mostly for sharp-tailed grouse on the bottom center there. But also again, for all the critters that use brushland areas. So like sandhill cranes and yellow rails and those kind of things. So the way I tell it to kids that I do programs for is I manage mice to moose and everything in between. So we would do surveys on all of those critters because we would run the hunting seasons as well. And so I've worked throughout my career with other state partners in the area, county partners, tribal partners, to census and survey all of the wildlife, mostly game species in the last few years. Early in my career, our non-game program was part of the wildlife division in the DNR, and they split off in the late 90s or so. And our non-game program went to our ecological and water resources division. But before that, I had done surveys on all kinds of different things. So turtles and owls, bats, anything that you can name, anything that moved out there, we counted it. So, so I still do a small mammal survey. You can see those 3 critters in the upper left there. A small mammal survey it was really designed with the DNR and also the 1854 Treaty Authority to kind of sample what the small mammal populations are doing. And lots of my coworkers weren't interested in doing that survey whatsoever. And you're just going out and trapping bulls and deer mice and short-tailed shrews is that bottom one, that those are the most common things I would get. But I always thought, how can you understand what the prey, what the other populations are doing if you don't know what the prey base is doing? So I always thought it was an important survey. You do it this time of year, a little bit earlier, and you're out in the field. So what could be better instead of sitting in front of a computer? So I always loved it. But we also have seasons on everything else here. We used to have seasons on moose. We had a 3-year wolf season. That's been discontinued as they've been relisted, and also seasons for sharp-tailed grouse, upper right, and waterfowl on some of our local wildlife management areas. Kenosha, WMA, just north of Duluth and Hermantown is a huge waterfowl management area. So I do hunter bag checks out there, and we worked with tribal partners and whatever throughout my career working in northern Minnesota to determine, back when we had a moose season or deer permits, what kind of a season it's going to be, how many permits you will give out for the different permit areas. And kind of a big change that I've seen in the deer management over the years is going to what we call adaptive management, where you have either kind of restricted, like lottery permit system, where you have to enter a lottery to take an antlerless deer, and you can take a buck statewide any place, 1 deer limit. But in the lottery, you can apply to take antlerless deer. And then the next restrictive is managed. And so that is, you can take 1 deer of either sex, and then hunter's choice is what that is, the managed. And then intensive is something that we had new within the last 20 years when I came here. And that was, you could take up to 5 deer in a permit area. So 1 buck always, and then 4 antlerless or 5 antlerless. And that has changed in the last few years down to 3. So a little bit of change. So as I said, when I first came here, my old supervisor, Rich Staffen, he was a real waterfowl person and used to work out of St. Paul doing lake assessments. And so he did some of the first surveys on the river of native plant communities and invertebrate communities. I don't know if he did birds and things like that, but he did some of the first surveys here with Brian Fredrickson, who later worked for the Pollution Control Agency in Minnesota. So Rich got me involved as soon as I came here when we started the St. Louis River Habitat Plan. And I came in on the tail end of that, of finishing that up, and we finished it in 2002. But that kind of set the tone and the focus of all of our work in the estuary ever since. And we're still working off that plan, working off the project worksheets that we developed for each project and kind of emphasis areas. Worked with lots of great people around the estuary that you might recognize some of these folks. But so I was involved with that, with writing the plan, and then also every iteration since then of like beneficial use impairment work groups and the habitat work group. We're working on an update to the plan right now. So ever since I came here, Rich got me involved in all of that, and then he slowly stepped back, and so I would represent the Cloquet work area that I was a part of. My office was actually up on Rice Lake Road in the office with the foresters. It was designed to have a wildlife person in every forest office that we had around the state. And so just as I left the position, they actually closed the wildlife office in Duluth, moved the position to Cloquet, and so we're not going to have a wildlife person in that office anymore. So kind of a shame, but when I came here, Rich got me involved in everything going on around here. So I was part of the Cloquet work area out of Cloquet. We have 3 people there, so the manager, a technician, and another assistant, and then I was the satellite office to the north. More up in the Cloquet Valley Forest and down here. And then we have another person in Pine County. So as Rich stepped away, he let me handle all the estuary work up here. And he would kind of join in the planning processes and whatever as he had time. But mostly that was my role. So I stepped away from DNR Wildlife and went to a project manager position with our division of ecological and water resources for 2 years. And so in that position, I was working full time on habitat restoration projects. And I have to say, most fulfilling work that I've done in my career, because I look at these as legacy type projects. And so Interstate Island was the first one that I had a hand in. And at first, in the upper right, you can see that like the dozer out there. That was the 2015, what I consider a Band-Aid project, that the island started flooding out, and the north side there to the top right was underwater, and waves were washing over, and we thought we were in danger of losing the island. So I pulled together only $60,000, and that was just enough to kind of shore up just the common tern colony there, and build up that part of the island. And the rest of it, in later years, the waves came right up to the edge of the work that we had done. And so that was the first project that I was able to do in the estuary. And over to the center left, you can see, I don't know if I can get the pointer over there. Yeah, you can see this area. This is a beautiful tern decoy created by our own Bill Majewski. When we did the first restoration, we wanted to make sure that the terns would come back to the restored area and not go to the rest of the flooded part of the island. So Bill made those beautiful decoys for us. You can see the terns nesting right around the decoys. And Annie Bracey with NRRI played tern calls like from the nesting colony to attract them to that area. So that was pretty successful, but lake levels continued to rise, river levels with it, and the island was in danger of washing out again. So in 2019, we took on another complete restoration of the entire island and tried to restore the footprint of it from back in the 50s, I believe was the photo we were going off of. And so bottom right is what the island looks like now. And the bottom center is me banding chicks with a tern on my head. We wore hard hats because the terns will dive bomb you, and they're very protective, very fabulous parents. But you can see the old string bridge, and that's what the island used to look like with all that vegetation. now we have bottom left, this beautiful new woven wire fencing, chain link fencing that's more permanent, and we don't have to fix it every year. So total success story. And the terns are doing okay. Haven't really responded yet in the way that we're hoping. So we're hoping once the island has been restored, once we get the gulls maybe under control a little bit, maybe the terns will respond a bit better. Yep, question?
Yes, ma'am. Why are you putting up the fence?
We put up the fences because there are less than 200 nesting pairs of common terns out there, and that's what the island is managed for.
Okay.
They're considered endangered in Wisconsin, threatened in Minnesota, and it's interstate island, so it's literally right divided by, or rides right on the line between the two states. And so less than 200 pairs of terns, but there are over 30,000 pairs of ring-billed gulls out there. And so the fencing is, there's a barrier fence to keep the gulls out completely. Then we have the string grid inside of that fencing. So we still have this string grid even inside the new fencing. And that is spread to a distance that it's slightly smaller than the wingspan of a gull. So it discourages them from nesting within the tern colony. And they can still get in there, and sometimes they'll land outside and walk in kind of thing. So that's what the fencing is for, to really protect the tern colony. So if you see this whole island, this tiny piece right here is the tern nesting area. So the gulls have the whole rest of that island to nest on. So we kind of want to just keep them out of the tern. So that's what the fencing for. Okay. So also I was involved in the Radio Tower Bay restoration project. And in that one, you can see the wood waste up here that was just piled in the bay once the sawmill operation was finished with sawing off a piece of wood, anything they didn't need, slab wood, sawdust, whatever, it just went right in the river. So this bay, I think it was, we found spots that were 5 to 8 feet deep, full of sawdust and wood waste like that. So of this bay, we only worked on the western part of the bay, so this area. And over here, there's still an active radio station with its copper grid under the water and its radio array. It's one of only a couple in the nation anymore, and so it's on the Register of Historic Places, I think, or sites. And so we only restored the western part of the bay, and we removed 150,000 cubic yards of material out of that bay. And so if you looked at it, if you see it like this, it doesn't look like a problem, but frogs, fish, nothing can really live in that substrate. Nothing nests there. It was kind of like a dead zone, really. So we restored that bay. You can see the dredge out on the water. We piped the material up the hill, a little over a mile up to US Steel property. And that's a dewatering facility. And we took the material and it was ground up right on the barge before it was piped up there as kind of a slurry. And US Steel was using the material, or will use the material, to reclaim part of their site. We had it tested, and it tested to like a grade that you could use for home use, like you could use it in your garden. No toxins, no anything. And folks said when they saw that what we were doing and taking out all that slab wood, well, can't you salvage that and make like beautiful instruments and all kinds of wood flooring and things like that? If you just touch the stuff, it just disintegrates, almost like sawdust. And so it's really well suited for use as compost. So that's what that's all about. And I think, I'm not sure that they've started using it, but they were going to use it, spread it on reclamation sites up there. Once they do some of the work that they're doing, some remediation and restoration as we speak, and we'll probably use that as like a biological medium to put over any sand or any cover that they might do. So also a huge part of our efforts in the past few years and starting when I was still in that other project manager position was wild rice restoration. And so we wrote the wild rice restoration plan back in 2014 and then started seeding all the bays that you see in the upper left. And we're still doing that. And so we've seeded just hundreds of thousands of pounds of wild rice that we gather from all over the state and I believe from Wisconsin as well. And we'll get seed from any place that we can. Bottom left is one of the early exposures that we did just as an experiment to see what would happen if we kept both geese and carp out. And originally we thought maybe carp would be the issue. And carp are all over the estuary and they dredge up and dig up vegetation and just kind of roil around in the mud. And so we thought they could do a number on wild rice and just pull it out the roots and make a total mess. But what we found is that it's actually the geese. And when we were writing the plan, folks that were our contractors that were writing the plan took me out there, showed me some of the sites and said, look, the rice gets to this certain point and then it's broken off by the wind. And I thought, wind, you know, this evolved with wind, with crazy winds that we have wherever it is. And I looked at it and it looked like somebody had gone out there with a lawnmower. Every single day, as soon as the rice sticks its head up, the geese just mow it down. And so we've realized with all kinds of research from all the folks working out there that it's absolutely a goose issue. And so we've been working on that kind of ever since.
Hey, Martha,
Mm-hmm.
we had, they put 400 pounds of olive weed in wild rice seed in olive beds. So
Oh, good.
relevant.
Warms my heart. Good deal. And then one of the last projects that I was involved with in that other project manager position was the restoration of Knowlton Creek near between the Spirit Mountain Chalet and the zoo area. And the creek had all kinds of issues after the 2012 flood, just a total mess. And we had giant culverts, 48-inch and larger culverts that were just standing on end like this. Crazy things, washed out. And so we did a kind of a reroute of the river, put in lots of stone structures and riffles and really changed the flow of the stream so that it's a more sustainable and resilient bank. So that was a great project to do. Redid a culvert and you could see nicer riffles at the mouth of it. But all the time that we were doing this work, I worked with John Lindgren pretty closely, that most of you probably know. And we always said, here we're working down in the basin of all these projects. Well, what's going on up in the upper watershed, in the drain that we're just, you know, flushing all of this down the drain. So we kind of did this backwards. After we cleaned this up, before we did this project, we had cleaned up sediment around Talus Island and kind of dredged that out of there, opened up the mouth. And now a delta has kind of formed again down there. John Lindgren is now involved in projects in the upper watersheds of all of our streams. And so he is working on restoring the upper watershed of Knowlton and lots of other creeks around the area. So we kind of got it backwards, but moving in the right direction, I think, over time anyway. So another huge part of my job was dealing with nuisance, injured wildlife, and also just crazy questions about wildlife, reports, observations, whatever. So bear calls, you know, there's a bear in my bird feeder, or the massive numbers of deer around town was a huge thing. The top center is a fox on Park Point. Bobcats moving into town. Here's a fisher that, and the fisher tracks. They often get reported as there's a black panther in my yard, even though they're this big. So, I think people need to visit the zoo more often. Lots of calls and working with WLSSD that top picture is geese out on their composting piles and gulls in the bottom one. on their composting piles. Well, as we restored Interstate Island, we restored 21st Avenue East, or 21st Avenue West, Bay. It's just a mecca for gulls and geese. So they're right outside their fence. They didn't have their fence enclosed all the time. And so I guess if the geese are nesting, the gulls are spreading droppings all over their piles, then they can't be considered clean and suitable for use in compost. And so it's kind of an issue, but we worked with them. They had all kinds of shooting permits and tried just all kinds of crazy things. They think it's beyond them to cover their piles. But one issue that I have with their operation is that they use waste grain from the breweries in their composting mix. So they have huge piles of grain out there. So all the geese and pigeons and gulls and everything are coming out there to feed on that. And then, they're worried about it and want to shoot all the geese and pigeons and gulls. So we've worked with them over the years, but then I'll always get lovely pictures like the center one, like, what is this? What's wrong with this deer? Those are deer droppings, and why are they in clumps? And, it's just a day in the life of a wildlife manager. But
Why are they?
it depends on what they're eating. So if they're eating things like that really bind them up, so if they're switching to like their woody diet for the winter, that'll kind of give them constipation or whatever. So that's what you're seeing. So it's just groups of pellets versus individual pellets. So just like everybody else. Not enough fiber, or maybe too much at that stage. So, and one constant throughout my time here has been the bears. And people around town know me as the bear lady, and I say, no, that's our bear researcher, Karen Noyes, that worked out of Grand Rapids for many, many years, but just all kinds of crazy bear things. So that's Rich Staffen, top left. We used to trap and relocate nuisance bears. And we wouldn't do it for things like garbage and bird feeders, because that's pretty common, and most of us can figure out a way to take care of that. And it's not really a bear issue, it's kind of a human issue, as most of these in this picture are. So this one was kind of a crazy story, like bottom left, second from the left, that's a destroyed car. So we got reports of strange things happening. They thought it was break-ins in cars around Island Lake. And it turns out it was a bear that knew how to open the car handles that were the flip-up kind. Not the old kind that you had to press a button, but the flip-up kind. He would get in there and just, look around. Well, somebody left, I think, just a packet of gum in the car. The bear got in there, the door closed behind it, and just made a holy mess. Just an absolute mess. This is Lake Superior College, bottom center, Lake Superior College, where the bear was trying to get in under an annex trailer and digging through, like tearing off all the weather stripping and insulation around there, climbing under. And so it had people working in the office above it. And so they thought, well, we'll just leave a radio playing, like talk radio on when we leave for the day. And I thought, you think it's going to care? It's listening to you talk radio all day. You need to use something really obnoxious, some crazy metal or something. And so finally they just patched that up and made noise and things like that, and got it out of there, got it to move on. Some really crazy things. This one, bottom right and up one, is a bear here that was denning under a house on the east end of Duluth. And a woman was kind of, she was an elderly person that had all kinds of physical issues. So she was in a wheelchair, but she was still feeding birds right outside the door of her house. And she had a ramp to get in and out of her house. Her daughter lived in Hawaii and would come and check on her now and then. So she was really having problems with this bear, tearing down the bird feeders, to the point that she went out in her wheelchair with a broom and whacked the bear at the, and she's in her wheelchair, you know? She was in her 90s at that point. And so her daughter thought, well, maybe I better come home and help my mom out. And so she called us, and what can we do? They patched up the crawl space under the house. And it's this big, huge house with a full porch, wraparound porch, and crawl space under it. So this bear had an area the size of this room to just get around in there. So they patched part of it, and the bear tore off all that patching, tore off her back little steps and porch. And she said it was like $30,000 worth of damage that this bear did. So we got this old work crew that we used to have that would help us with projects all over town, help people shovel snow, that kind of thing. Well, they came and spent the day really kind of armoring the crawl space and keeping it out of there. But when they went in there, they found like 40 bags of garbage stored up in there and probably 30 bird feeders under there that it had been living there for years. And so they patched it all up. They didn't want the bear killed or hauled away or anything. We stopped doing that probably about 10 or 15 years ago, where we just help people deal with their issues with bears and figure out a way to deal with it. The only time that we trap bears anymore is if they need to be destroyed, and that's what we do. We don't trap and relocate anymore. Rich used to trap and tag bears that were causing problems and would find that they would come right back to the same area or 2 houses down within a couple days. And so we found it really didn't work. And so we only would trap and destroy bears if they were really acting aggressively, doing crazy damage. So this other picture, like center right, is an aluminum garage door. The bear tore that door right down, and there was another access door on the side, but they had a 50-gallon drum of birdseed in it. So instead of, tearing down the little wooden door, he decided to do that. So I think that bear went away. That was kind of a sad deal, but yeah. And one of my worst nightmares is the top right, that we ended up putting our bird feeders on a cable like that. And the deer can't get at them, the bears can't reach them. That bear could. So I don't know if you could see that, but that's a bear shinning out on the cable to get at that bird feeder. And there's other pictures of it, hanging out there, and just crazy. So that's like the stuff of nightmares. But so far so good with our feeders. We feed year round, and we have a sow and 3 cubs that hang around our place, a great big boar, and it's like fine. If you get into the compost or whatever, no big deal. But so now, like this dumpster, we kind of work with people on ways that you can secure your garbage and dumpsters and take your bird feeders down, that kind of thing. So we try not to destroy bears anymore. I did. And I wanted to have all the nuisance bear calls in the area, or maybe in this region, come to my personal phone so I could talk people off the ledge. And that was one of my favorite parts of dealing with nuisance wildlife, was taking somebody that just wanted everything shot, everything removed. This is your wildlife, come get it. Everything from a woodchuck in the yard that, I'm afraid to let the kids outside. I swear to you, I'm not exaggerating. To getting them to understanding that this is a benefit of living here. We have all of these wonderful critters that some people have never seen, never will see, living right around us. And it's kind of our job to kind of police ourselves. But I always thought it was a good thing if I could talk people down like that and get them to understand that it's a gift instead of a nuisance, and that we're kind of a nuisance because we just want to live the easy life. One recent call a couple of years ago, there was a guy sitting out in his open garage in the summer and just sitting in the shade, having a beer or whatever. And the bear kept coming in. So he called me, and he just wanted this bear destroyed. You have to come and get this thing before something happens. And I said, well, can't you just close the garage door? I don't want to live that way. It's like, okay, like, guess you can have bear problems. Seems like a pretty easy fix to me, but just crazy things. And let's see, I'll go back one. Back to that Park Point fox in the top center. One of my favorite stories was out on Park Point, one of the assisted living facilities had doors that, like automatic doors for residents with walkers or whatever else, you know, to get in easily. So the first set of doors just opened automatically. The second set inside, you needed a key or something to get in, had to buzz in. Well, I got a call one day that there was a fox, one of the Park Point foxes. They're so tame out there that they walk between people on their beach towels, will grab a sandwich off your towels. People are walking their dogs down the street and the foxes will follow them. So I got a call from this facility that a fox came and got through the first set of doors. And if the second set wasn't locked or whatever, would have come right in and, you know, been like a therapy animal, I guess. Never a dull moment in Duluth. So, and I also dealt with just a variety of things in and around Duluth. So the top center and top left. So the top left, it's a bunch of tires on the top of the Gray Salon building in downtown Duluth. And top center, there's a mallard nesting in one of the tires. And so every year, one or two would nest up there, and Mike Furtman, local friend and photographer, would go up there and took some of these pictures. And they would wait until all the ducklings hatched, and then put them in a box or something, gather them all up, carry them down to the bottom, release them across the street so that Susie Mallard could see where everybody was, and then off they'd go. But that went on for years. It's like welcome to Duluth. And then also top right, that's a peregrine on the same building that they finally put up a nest box near there. And the peregrines used to nest on the Blatnick Bridge, and then also at the coal power plant. And so now the power plant has put up a nest box, and so has the Gray Salon. When the chicks, and I think they might have nested on the Oliver Bridge too, but when the chicks would hatch, they would often fall right into the water when they were nesting on the bridges. And so sometimes they'd be rescued by Coast Guard or our conservation officers, whatever, put them back up on a ledge or something, but that went on for years too. And so finally, they built the nest boxes. So that's kind of helped. Another thing that's kind of a new development is top second from the right, turkeys all over the place in Duluth. And I used to be the representative for wildlife for this region. So all the way down to Pine County, north to the border, from Grand Rapids to the shore is our region. And I used to be the regional representative for the turkey committee and turkey management. And so we introduced turkeys to central Pine County back in the mid 2000s. And that's as far north as we would go, and thought, okay, well, this is good habitat. We used to have a line like north of Highway 2 that we thought was the line of death, that the snow depths were just too much and turkeys couldn't find any food up here, whatever. So even when I was just the committee rep, I would get calls from people up in Ely and Tower area saying, well, can't I just release turkeys around my cabin? And wouldn't that be a good thing? And I thought, no, it's not a good thing for a number of different reasons, disease being the main one. The birds aren't really adapted to living here, especially with those snow depths, and there's no agriculture up there for them to hang out around cattle operations and find something to eat. But I thought, well, if you want to feed the fisher and the eagles and whatever, that's up to you. Well, then these same people would call you back 2 years later. Well, do I need a permit to shoot these now? It's like, yes, you do. You released some, but now they're wild. So yes, but that's been kind of a new thing to see the turkeys kind of move into the area. And I know people have dumped them around Spirit Mountain area. And so they've expanded from there. I see them way up in the Cloquet Valley Forest, north of Duluth. It's just pine country. And I've seen a few broods up there. So really, really strange and unusual, and people are still happy to see them. I consider some of them, like the one to the left, if you can see it, I call them Jenny O Cross, that you'll see this turkey that looks wild, but the whole neck will be white, the head will be white. Or there was one up at Stax Dim last winter that was mostly white with like black flecks at the end of its feathers. So totally a game farm bird that somebody just released. And There are farmers up around Sax-Zim that used to feed them all winter long. When those people either moved away or passed away, then no more turkeys the following year. So it's not something that we advise, but I know it's happening all over the place. Another crazy Duluth thing is top left, second from the top. That's a coyote and a black lab that for years around the Anger golf course, we would get calls about this pair hanging out together. And people would go and try and catch the dog and thought, oh, you know, it's hanging out with the coyote, it's going to get rabies or whatever. And the dog would just run, wanted nothing to do with people anymore, and had kind of gone feral and was hanging out with this coyote. So only in Duluth again. Kind of center, second from the top, an orphan bear cub that a lot of times we'll get calls about that. This time of year where bears have denned up, or early in the spring when this one was probably just born, and then there'll be logging operations will disturb a den, or a lot of times bears will just den up in a fallen tree like the root wad. And so this was probably disturbed, and we had to go and rescue that little bugger and take him to, there's a wildlife rehabber in Garrison, Minnesota, that will overwinter cubs like that and raise them up until they can be released when they're older. But all kinds of things. So again, we used to have moose in the area, used to have a moose season, and I've flown moose surveys for many, many years since I worked in northwestern Minnesota. Sharp-tailed grouse, standing in the top of the spruce tree there. Sharp tails have really crashed in this part of the state too, since I've been here. And when I was in northwestern Minnesota, it was the same situation, and the habitat just got too rank. They really like a nice mix of grass and brush, but kind of lower brush that they can see over, and they display in an open area, in a grassy area. And our brushlands have succeeded. We can't do enough prescribed burning. And so they're kind of getting away from us. So when they start to get too high, the grouse see that as an obstruction, and they're worried about predators. So we've really lost our sharp-tailed grouse population and our moose populations, mostly for the same reason, just real habitat changes. In the case of moose, I belong to a group of moose biologists from all over North America and the world. And we go to conferences every year and hear about the plight of moose throughout North America and Europe and Russia, China, wherever they exist. And it's a combination of diseases and parasites and all kinds of things. And each locale has something different that they're dealing with. So Minnesota, we have a huge prevalence of brainworm that moose can contract from deer, from being in close proximity to deer, and it can carry to elk as well, and other ungulates, to caribou and whatnot. And so as deer populations have expanded into moose range, as our forest has changed, deer are living closer to moose than ever before. So that's one thing. Also, we have an issue with liver flukes here that even when I was in the Northwest, the fluke loads that the moose would have, the liver would be destroyed. The liver kind of helps them process the tannins in evergreen or coniferous food that they eat. So without that, they can't process that. They end up having all kinds of crazy mineral deficiencies. But then also, that's one thing that that helps them produce heat and stay warm in the winter is a fully functioning liver. And we found their livers were just not functional. And so Minnesota, it's a combination of things. Also predation as well. We have wolves and lots of other jurisdictions, people that I visit with and travel around to meet and see. They either don't have liver flukes at all, don't have wolves or bears in some cases. And so in their areas, like Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, the moose in some areas are overrunning their habitat and just browsing whatever they can, just to death, really. But then in some areas, like on Nova Scotia, the mainland, they're considered endangered because they've just crashed there and not doing well. But in the New England states, we have winter ticks that are moose ticks and specific to moose. We have some, and we have outbreaks every now and then. But the New England states, that's what the moose are suffering from there. And they're just really losing their moose to winter ticks. And they'll have, we used to count, we would find dead moose when I worked in the Northwest, and grad students and others, researchers would actually count the number of ticks on an animal. And the people in New England have like a survey they do to judge how many. And you would find 30,000 to hundreds of thousands of ticks on one animal. So literally the calves would die of anemia and adults would be anemic just from absolute blood loss. They start to rub their hair off with that itchy, think about that, your skin just crawling. And so then they start to die of hypothermia because they've rubbed off all their hair. So they're called ghost moose when you see just that under the white hair underneath because they've rubbed off all the dark fur off of them. So that's one change that I've seen in the time that I've been here and just in northern Minnesota. Another thing, bottom left, those two photos. So that's Rich Staffen, my old supervisor, and that was us rounding up geese in one of the cemeteries in Duluth. And every year throughout Minnesota, when I worked in the Northwest, they would actually trap geese in the Twin Cities that they didn't want, overpopulated, and we would bring them to other parts of the state. So we would bring them up and release them in northwestern Minnesota. It's like, wow, good deal. And you know, everybody's happy. Well, now, you know, everybody knows nobody wants any more geese. So we don't do that anymore, but we still ban them around the state. And so even though we did the roundup and dispatch on the Wisconsin side of the river again this summer, so for the past 2 years, we still banded geese around the area, but we decided not to around the estuary because, you know, we're trying to get rid of them around the rice bed so that we can grow some rice here. So that's the change, that now we fence and put up exclosures to protect the rice and have for a few years. And this photo just shows you the rice outside the exclosure and inside. And inside is the only place that we're growing rice now. We can't fence off the entire estuary. We can't fence off the whole bay. So this is what we're left with for all of this effort since 2014. So we really need to get a handle on the geese. On the Minnesota side, the city council just approved the goose control plan. And my agency said that they had to have an approved plan before they could get a state permit to control geese on the Minnesota side of the river. All of our banding that we do, we see that all the loafing sites where the geese spend all their time is on the Minnesota side of the river, of course, but we're only permitted to control them on the Wisconsin side. So we're working on getting the permits on the Minnesota side so that we can capture every place wherever we find the geese. We did the Grassy Point restoration and it was just covered with geese when we went out to do our scouting for the roundup. And they had planted all kinds of new vegetation, and here were the geese just, you know, grazing over the whole thing. So city council passed the plan. We have our federal permit, or that is going to our federal partners to get the permit. So all that we're waiting for is a Minnesota DNR permit. The Wisconsin Wildlife Services folks have to attend a training to control geese by lethal methods. We're hoping that we can have that training done, permit in hand by next June when we'll do the next roundup. So, and if not, I think all of us should be out there with kayaks and just round the geese over to the Wisconsin side. But call your legislator, call somebody. So, but the best part about all of this is just all the wonderful people that I've gotten to work with over the years. And you probably recognize a lot of these folks, but it's been just a joy to work with all these folks and to work in the estuary. Some of the better changes, things coming up is, I mentioned, we're rewriting the habitat plan, working on that. Also rewriting the wild rice management plan and updating that, if we seed so many hundreds of pounds or pounds in each bay, which are the best bays to be seeding in? How long do we continue this? What are the triggers for goose control? How many years do we do that? What types of protection do we do? Those kinds of things. So that'll be something new. And then we're also planning for life after the area of concern delisting. So what are the next steps after that? So the Duluth Natural Areas Program Plan, that's one effort. The Lake Superior Headwaters Sustainability Partnership is kind of looking at, as we rewrite the habitat plan, what are the next steps? What are the projects that we didn't complete in the time that we started the plan back in 2002? What's left to be done? What would we like to do? What are lingering issues and problems that we need to address, and funding sources and that kind of thing. So still working on all of that. But yeah, as I said earlier, I hope to continue with a lot of this work just in my own time and kind of on my schedule now. But it's really nice and the best of all worlds to not represent the agency anymore. And everybody gets my experience and knowledge for free at this point. And I can speak freely and just help out where I can. So yeah. Any questions? Yeah. Thank you. You're welcome.
On the Wisconsin side of the border, we're seeing a lot more bobcats, especially inside Superior.
Yeah.
Are you seeing the same thing on the blue side?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. And so, and I don't really know how to explain that other than the snowshoe hare and rabbit populations were at a high for a while. So all of our predators went crazy for a bit. So we probably had foxes all over the place too, but we really saw an explosion of bobcats. And with the foxes, we had mange that moved through all the canine population.
Mhm.
So foxes all over the place that I understand Wildwoods would capture them and bring them in and treat them for mange and then release them. So, but you can't do that with an entire population. We lost a population of wolves that was just on the eastern edge of Duluth going up the expressway. And they were so mangy, people were leaving food out for them, but they would stand in the middle of the road or, you know, right on the edge of the road. And really one by one, they just got hit. But at the same time, we saw the bobcat population just explode. And to the point where people are seeing them all over the place. You see that little tail, and people think that bobcats have no tail. So they're reported as cougars all over the place. Like everything is reported as cougars here. I'm never going to say never because we do have them passing through. And as soon as I say never, I'll be staring at one in someone's shed. So anyway, bobcat, that increase has caused all kinds of problems. And so we've seen our Fisher and Martin populations just crash. And part of that is bobcats. That our researchers on Fisher and Martin have had cameras out and just observation, been out and studying the dens of Fisher and Martin. And they have seen bobcats just like sit there and stalk the female fishers. And if they can hear kits in the tree, the females move the kits around like once every 2 weeks or so. The bobcats will just sit there and wait and kill the female and all the kits. So we're just seeing that like crazy change in our forest management where we're not leaving so many big, huge trees on the landscape anymore. So Fisher and Martin are having a tougher time finding good den trees and big dead trees. And so they're moving the kits more and more to find things, and then that's what's happening. So bobcats are doing a number on a lot of things.
I have
So
a question. We're seeing a lot of turkeys, and as a grouse hunter, I'm always curious, is there a competition?
turkeys will eat anything. And so I think grouse are more limited, so they don't have a whole lot of overlap in their habitat. They will to some extent, like we have them both down in southeastern Minnesota, where that was kind of our turkey stronghold, where we started our first turkey releases way back in the 40s and 50s. And we've always had rough grouse down in that forested part of the state. But they come into contact with each other, but turkeys like more agriculture and open land. They like older forests with an open understory. I hunt them, so, I know this, the good spots, but, yeah, turkeys prefer more open, than rough grouse do. And even though rough grouse like early successional forests, that's very different from a turkey woods. And if you look at it, you can say, this is a grouse woods, you can barely walk through it. Turkey woods, wide open, you can walk and see, for half a mile or whatever. So they do compete. Like I am a little bit concerned about the ones that are up in the forest now, but I think they won't really make it. When we were trying to release birds in the western part of the state, we had eagles picking them off like crazy. And so I thought we have plenty of eagles up here, so I'm not really too worried about it, but I'm more worried about them, competing with grouse and other things. So, yeah, that's my main concern. Yeah.
When the kid, oh, sorry, just a second. Kate asked if you would repeat the question so that people on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
You were talking about liver flukes in wolves. What's the source of the liver fluke?
So liver flukes are, they start out the whole cycle like snails and move through a number of different species, but they're kind of shed, the eggs are shed onto the vegetation. And just like brainworm or other things that moose get, so they're shed in the same bed areas that the moose bed down in every year. And so if we don't get, just like brainworm, if we don't get really cold winters with deep snow, then those things hang around on the ground on vegetation. If we have really wet years, wet cycles, then you have better fluke survival, just like snails. And same with brainworm, that they hang around better. And so they move through the moose and deer just in picking them up through the vegetation. And then they like shed the eggs and fall on the ground, and the whole thing starts all over again. So just like the brainworm cycle. So yeah, so I love good hard winters, and when it's really cold and crummy out there, it's at least, maybe it's killing some emerald ash borer, and maybe it's killing some brainworm, snails and ticks and liver flukes, and yeah, go winter.
Got a question about the estuary waterfowl populations. Yeah, I can remember earlier 2000s, they planted some of the number of waterfowl cormorants decreased significantly.
Yeah. So the question was about waterfowl in the estuary and numbers being down, and I would agree with that. Yeah. Honestly, but yeah, I remember when we were having problems with Interstate Island and all the flooding, and just lake levels were crazy. And on the Minnesota Point side anyway, just when we were out scouting for geese, for goose banding, you pick up other waterfowl, and just the areas along Park Point that normally are just brushy areas that even you might get sparrows and things like that out there, full of waterfowl. And they're just pouring out of there. But since the lake levels have gone down, I think they might be just shifting to other areas that we're not seeing as much, like Eloise Bay for sure. Mike Furtman, I mentioned, the photographer, he spends a lot of time just photographing waterfowl that stick around here all winter long. And he gets out to Eloise first thing in the spring, ice off, and then all the way up through the season. And he documents just the number of species that we have out there. So I think they just use areas like that are more secluded when the water levels are lower, and probably up in the upper estuary in some of our rice bays and more shallow protected areas. That's what I'm guessing. But I think numbers are down on a lot of things anyway. Like nationwide, we're seeing declines in certain species of waterfowl. So I think it's a combination of both. Yeah.
And an old question, Grand Rahab, just a mess with geese. And the bay there, right by the trading post. They found some way to get rid of them.
I know a lot of ways. Yeah. So the question was about geese in the bay around Grand Marais, and that they found a way to get rid of them, and what are some ways, or do we know how to do that? And yeah, we have a number of ways. Our permitting system with the DNR is just so crazy that if you were a farmer and had hundreds of geese in your cornfield or alfalfa, we could give you a permit to take up to 20 geese a day. Right now, like tomorrow, we could get you that permit. And when you shoot your 20, if there's still more, give you another permit the day after. So while we're trying to get the permit to control geese on the Minnesota side of the river, the zoo had a couple geese. They had like 4 or 5 nests right around the bear facility and around their visitor center. And one of the ganders was chasing kids and biting them and drawing blood. And so they said, we need to do something about this. And so they wanted to just destroy the nest, destroy the eggs, and wanted a permit for that. We got them a permit the next day. We went out there to show them how to check the eggs to see how far along they were. We thought if they're close enough to hatching, let them hatch. The geese will move out and won't be chasing kids anymore. So we went out there to check on the nest, and every one of them had been depredated by raccoons, skunks, something. So problem solved. But anyway, it's super easy for most folks to get a permit, but not for municipalities, for parks, for golf courses, whatever. So another manager and I were really concerned about that, and took that message up to our top brass, and didn't get much of a response. But we said, how is that any different when it's kind of these people with parks or resorts or golf courses? It's their livelihood too. That's property damage, and could be a human health issue with the E. coli, whatever. But no, right now we don't give out permits for that, but we should. And that's what we're hoping to do, is our goose roundup, and you catch those geese and then dispatch them. And the first year, so 2 years ago, we gave them to the Lake Superior Zoo for animal feed. And this year we couldn't do that because we had avian influenza. And so we had to landfill all of them. So kind of a shame, kind of a waste, but that was the policy statewide. We wanted to give them to a captive, like big cat rehab site, and they said, and to a site that has wolves, and they said influenza had passed to a fox, so they didn't want to give it to any mammals. At first they said, we just won't feed it to our birds, the geese, but then nobody wanted them. So there are lots of ways to get rid of geese. But the best thing is where we trap geese to ban them or to dispatch them or whatever. Most of the time in the upper estuary, it's places like the apartments, the River Place apartments next to Boy Scout Landing. They mow the lawn right down to the water's edge. So if you don't do that, if you either just make a path for yourself to get down to your boat or your dock, and then you leave the grass growing this tall, geese will not pass through that. When they're causing all the problems for us in the wild rice and throughout the summer, they're flightless for a few weeks. That's why we can catch them, to ban them or dispatch them. The adults are molting, and so they can't fly, and the young ones are too small to fly. So when they're in that vulnerable state, that's why they find a good spot where they can find food and shelter, and they feel safe there. So they'll just sit right there and munch everything around there. That's why they're doing so much damage to the rice beds. But if people just stop mowing their lawns all the way down, sometimes you can just use like a little fence like this high, and just string like mylar tape ribbon, or even just twine. We're trying that on some of the wild rice exposures to see if that works at all. And it's as simple as that, just a physical barrier, and it's enough that it might seem like a bad thing. It's enough to send them down the river or down the lake shore to your neighbor's place that does mow all the way down the shore or whatever. But yeah, Jerry, maybe some of you might know from NRI, just bought a lake place on Island Lake and said, holy cow, until I can get some landscaping done, and plant some shrubs. What can I do about the geese? And I said, I have a whole lot of fencing you can borrow, you know, if you need it. And he decided to just go with like a strip of snow fencing and some string for now. But there's so many things you can do. It's pretty darn easy, but it's just kind of willingness to do it. So there are lots of businesses around the estuary that have goose issues, just them wading up onto their property and making a mess all over the place or coming up to their docks. The little marina on Park Point has motion activated sprinkler, and that keeps the ducks and the geese off their dock. So simple things. All these wildlife problems can be solved. You just have to kind of try to be a little bit smarter than that. Not always easy. Yeah.
Is it not with the wild rice that available harvest some? Or is it just for habitat?
Well, the question was, is the goal for the wild rice restoration to be harvested or just for habitat? And it's a combination of both. So the goal for the wild rice management plan is to restore as much rice as we can, but to have a harvestable stand at least 75 acres before we decide that we're good to go. And we're nowhere near there. Nowhere near there. Even last year with the really low river and lake levels, we had just great rice production because no one could get to it to harvest it. The water was too shallow. And so we got good seeding, but it's an annual plant. And so if it doesn't reseed itself and the geese keep mowing it down before it can reseed, you get nothing. And so it is a combination. It's a cultural thing for the Anishinaabe folks around here that this is part of their migration story. And this is the place where you will stop, where food grows on the water. This is it, Spirit Lake and Spirit Island. So it's an important cultural thing to restore that, but that's the goal, to have harvestable rice that's healthy for people to eat. So we're worried about the water quality and all that too. It's all part of the whole, but habitat as well. And it's all part of the same piece. So big picture.
Well, thank you, Martha. We'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming. And I want to remind you that we do this every month. So if you want to come right back here, November 9th, here at the Estuarium, we're going to have Molly Wick, who's a PhD candidate, and a whole panel of some local students talk about what they love about the river, and let you all talk about what you love about the river too. So we can just continue this love fest of the river to next month. And also we did record this. So if you know somebody who would just really jam on watching the recording, you should look for it. Probably in a week or more, we'll have it posted to the Sea Grant website for the River Talks and also on our Facebook and stuff like that. So you can look for that too. So thank you so much for coming, and take snacks as you go if there's still some left over. Thanks, everybody.